handful of things are important. It came from over 1,000 contributors. So people giving $5, $50, $100, some more. OFT, unlike their brethren, OEA, contributed $10,000. And that's massive. That's huge. You know, it really makes your goal 65,000 instead of 75,000. And then Hamilton County RTA, just like Allen County RTA or any of the other little chapters, contributed 15,000. So that 25,000, and I told the board, we're not going to get 75,000. It doesn't matter if we needed 75 million, 75,000. We're not going to get it. So it's really an exercise in futility. And lo and behold, within 3 months, we had the money. And no doubt, in large part, to the efforts of OFT and Hamilton County, that people see the little thermometer thing creeping up. And we would talk to Ted, he goes, hey, you guys are really doing good. I go, really? Oh, yeah, you're really doing great. And so I wanted to acknowledge those folks. And one other that I think is really kind of special, Alyssa got a phone call, and it was, somebody said, hey, how close are you to your goal? And I said, well, we're about, it's either $1,360 or $1,660. And he goes, good, I'm going to take care of that today. And we said, what? What are you talking about? I'm going to charge my credit card that much. And I said, I wasn't in the office. She called me up and said, hey, you better call this guy back. And I did immediately. And he did not want any credit. I don't even want you have to know my name because you got to charge my card. That's all you need to know. And we talked for about, I was driving from Columbus to Toledo, and we talked for an hour. And he told me some of his life story, and he goes, here's the deal. It's a good thing to do. I don't have anybody associated with teaching. Nothing in my background. I just think it's a good cause, and I want you to have more of what you were promised. And I said, well, you know, with people like you, this thing may go somewhere. And obviously we were able to meet our goal, and Ted got started, and we're excited about it. So I just wanted to make those points before anybody got too absorbed in Ted's talk.
Robin, real quick, that was my friend Richard, last name unknown.
Mm-hmm.
Richard was just diagnosed with cancer yesterday.
Oh.
Richard is a former Green Beret and also in Vietnam War with 2,000 jumps out of a plane.
Wow. I would have been here today, maybe not.
So I wanted to mention when I think Dean talked about the book, Who Stole My Pension, that someone had gotten the book and read it. Similarly, there was a stuntman in Hollywood who bought the book, and he got together with the Screen Actors, and the Screen Actors Guild in 2020 decided that this would be a great time to cut health care for over 65-year-olds. So, to their credit, they actually decided this a few years earlier, not expecting the pandemic to hit in 2020. So, let's say in 2018, they decided to cut healthcare over 65-year-olds. 2020, they actually did it, told everybody they were doing it. So the Screen Actors were very upset about this. And they called me, and they said, will you represent us in a lawsuit against the Screen Actors Guild? So I put together a team, and we said, sure, we'd be happy to do it. And so we now represent Whoopi Goldberg, Morgan Freeman, Mark Hamill, Shirley Jones, and I'm forgetting some. Oh, and our lead plaintiff, unfortunately, was Ed Asner, who recently died. And so the day we announced the lawsuit last year, they produced a 2.5-minute documentary narrated by Morgan Freeman about our case, and it was in NBC News. And that's the power of the book. They read the book, the stuntman passed it around, and the next thing you know, we're suing them to restore their health care, hopefully. So, and by the way, I've written a new book, which is called How to Steal a Lot of Money Legally, which is a guide to how Wall Street steals money in perfectly legal ways, which is meant to educate people as part of a financial literacy program. But mainly what I wanted to do today, like I said, is to have you all have an opportunity to ask questions, because I have written I think 100-page report. I've written probably 10 articles in Forbes talking about what I did with Forbes is, Forbes will only let me write about a subject so many times. So what I did was I sliced up the Ohio report into 10 different articles instead of writing one article about the Ohio report. And so I was able to sneak it in and have one article about the failure of legislative oversight, the failure of the Retirement Study Council to actually follow the law and do a fiduciary audit every 10 years. Another article about getting paid money for doing nothing, which is fees for uncommitted, fees on invested uncommitted capital. Then other article, I sliced it up, and so I was able to stretch it out for quite some time. Another one was called The End of Transparency, which was about the fact that the pension fund is, like pension funds across the country, being completely opaque and not following the requirements as far as transparency and access to public records. And speaking of which, I have done the only forensic investigations of public pensions ever done, I've done. With the exception now, Chris Toby has done the first. I got a call during the middle of your investigation to do an investigation of the Chicago Police Pension Fund. I couldn't do it, so I referred it to Chris, and Chris did do the investigation. And so the only two people who've ever done forensic investigations of pensions are sitting here. And so it's a new phenomena, and I wrote about it again in Forbes last week, which is that participants around the country are doing the work, building a roadmap for the SEC and law enforcement to follow. All they need to do is to follow the roadmap we're building here. Because this lack of transparency has swept the country like a wave. Every city, county, and state in the United States has had Wall Street go in and argue that these investment records should not be made public. That's unprecedented in the history of this country. Our state and local and federal Freedom of Information Acts have never excluded so much information as they do now. I mean, 20 years ago, if you wrote to a public pension fund and said, I want to see all your investment documents, they'd give them to you in a heartbeat. It's all very straightforward. This is all new, unprecedented, and it involved well over $1 trillion. So if something wrong is happening here, it's happening in secrecy, and nobody is being allowed to see two things. The two things we worry about with secrecy are, one, what is being kept secret from the pension fund? Like I think Mark's made a point earlier, when he sued on behalf of John Dan Schroeder, he discovered the pension fund didn't know what was going on in these investments. The money manager wasn't telling the pension fund. The other element of secrecy is, what is the pension fund not telling you, the participants? And if you have this secrecy, you don't know whether the people watching over your pension fund are doing their job. And that's what's so insidious about it. So what happens is Wall Street and pension administrators conspire, collaborate in this secrecy because it helps them both. You don't get to see whether the pension overseers are doing their job, and you don't get to see whether Wall Street is ripping you off. So it's a particularly insidious thing that's happened. It's happened all across the country. There's criminal aspects of it, Law enforcement should be interested. Every state attorney general should be all over this. In Rhode Island, I told the Attorney General of Rhode Island, this is the biggest financial crime in the history of the state. It's like 8 years ago. Didn't listen to me at all. North Carolina, we met with the Attorney General. Didn't listen, didn't do a thing. The only Attorney General who, to my knowledge, and Mark may know more about this, who's ever done anything about pensions has been Elliot Spitzer, who I worked with in New York in 2003. So the FBI should be all over this, and they are now involved in Pennsylvania. But the FBI doesn't get investment fraud. I work with them, and I've trained FBI and Department of Labor examiners as well. They don't get investment fraud. But if this information we're mining now ever becomes public, every Attorney General, the FBI, the state securities regulators, and the federal securities regulators, and the Department of Labor should be all over this. And certainly we've given them enough in the forensic investigations I've done and now Chris has done to give them a roadmap. There is smoke here. You need to look. Here are the documents you need to look at. Here are some of the most incriminating provisions. I've encountered provisions in money manager contracts that say, we reserve the right to withhold from you, the pension fund, information about our criminal conduct. Criminal conduct. And so it's that outrageous. You don't have to be a, Sherlock Holmes to figure out that that's inappropriate. So the other thing I wanted to just mention to you all is I am possibly the leading expert on pension forensics in the world. And the only reason I'm telling you that is, so when STRS tells you something, and I tell you what they're saying is not true, I have, trust me, at least as much experience, well, exponentially greater experience in these matters than they do. And so I'm just gonna go over like 4 things, major misrepresentations by STRS, and then we'll turn it over to Q&A. And so I call this STRS versus reality. And this is where it's really quite stark. So, in 1999, Arthur Levitt was then chairman of the SEC, said public pensions should be fully transparent. I don't think anybody in this room would disagree. A, transparency is a good thing. And B, public pensions involving trillions in public money set aside for retirement security of government workers should be, if anything's going to be fully transparent, these funds should be fully transparent. Arthur Levitt, chairman of the SEC, said that. Recently, STR says it's unrealistic to demand transparency. Investment firms would not risk doing business with government entities if they had to be fully transparent. So, if investment firms that wouldn't dare to do business absent secrecy, why are you doing business with them? If secrecy is necessary and secrecy is inappropriate legally for these pension funds, the minute they say we need to operate in secrecy, we refuse to be in compliance with public records law, the conversation should end. People often say to me, are there any hedge funds, are there any private equity funds that are appropriate for public pensions? And I say, sure, if they're willing to be fully transparent. If they're willing to be fully transparent, that's the first hurdle. Then there are other issues like fees or whatever. But transparency should be undebatable. We should all agree transparency is what's required here. Yet your pension fund is telling you that's not true. I'm telling you, as the leading expert, it is true. And don't believe what STRS is telling you. So that's the next slide.
Ted,
Yes.
I just want to add one point to amplify what Ted's saying here. And all you need to do is watch the TV show Billions to understand my point here. And if you haven't watched it yet, you should. It's pretty good. The hedge fund, to have a multi-billion-dollar hedge fund in this country, you have to have investment in public money. There is nobody else out there that has, other than maybe Bill Gates and Bezos, that have the kind of money to invest to build that hedge fund. STRS acts like they're doing us a favor to come and do business with them. STRS, Ohio's combined 5 pensions are the 3rd largest set of public pensions in the country after California and New York. These folks would kill their mothers, and some of them literally would, to get these pension investments. And probably have.
You've been watching too much Billions.
Well, at least on Billions, that's my son works on Wall Street, so I just don't know. But at the end of the day, this is a small ask for a very big deal for these folks. And frankly, they should, if they're afraid of transparency, you should be afraid of them. Because why wouldn't they want to be completely transparent with their investors? There's no secret sauce here.
No.
That there's no formula or it's not like the pharmaceutical industry, where somebody knows how to make a vaccine. But this is investments that are being made mostly on public markets.
Absolutely. And it's interesting that one of the things SDR has said is that that public pensions universally oppose full transparency. In fact, in 2015, a group of public pensions all over the country, including CalPERS, Rhode Island, others, wrote to the SEC asking for private investments to be made more transparent. And I think there were 20 funds that.
Was it a CFA letter you're talking about?
No, this was one signed by Magaziner and all. It was signed by all. It's in that Go Local Province article that came out yesterday. But anyhow, this has been public pensions all over the country have been urging the SEC to make these private investments what I call secret investments. Private equity should be called secret equity. But droves of pensions around the country have been pleading with the SEC to make these investments more transparent. The fact that STRS is not among them is particularly disturbing, I think. But to say that, like in this example, carried interest, the state of Rhode Island, I forced the state of Rhode Island to disclose the carried interest. Since 2013, the state of Rhode Island pension fund discloses on their website what the carried interest is. So when STRS says nobody does it, can't happen, nobody wants that kind of transparency, that's just dead wrong. They're misrepresenting the facts to you. And here's, to me, one of the greatest examples. SEC's website today, go to their website. Carried interest is a type of performance fee. STRS's most recent reply to my investigation, carried interest is not an investment cost. Carried interest is not a fee. Okay? STRS doesn't define what is and what isn't an investment cost. Federal securities regulators, state securities regulators, they define what is an investment cost. If you're paying Wall Street millions and billions of dollars related to an investment, it's a cost, it's a fee. So you should disclose it. And here, the interesting thing is, even if carried interest is not an investment cost, but you want to know, your participants want to know, why wouldn't STRS disclose it? Maybe they view it as irrelevant, but you want to know. Why wouldn't they disclose it? You know why they wouldn't disclose it, because it's a massive number. So that's just maintaining the public trust. If the participants want to know how many tires are on your car, tell them. there's no harm in telling them. The fact that STRS is misrepresenting the federal securities laws, and we're going to talk about ERISA in a minute, but they're misrepresenting what the federal securities laws say. And that's disturbing because you all are potential investors in other deals as well. And the information they're giving you for your personal investment knowledge is wrong. So that's another very significant thing to keep in mind. Go to the next slide. This one is, I think many of you will remember this.
Yes.
Apparently, STRS and their investment consultants believe that the pay teachers receive over the summer is money for doing nothing. It's like a tip, a gratuity. And this is what they said at the, I think the last
August.
board meeting,
August.
at the August board meeting. So, the rebuttal to this is, you tell me, is it? Does the money received over the summer as a school teacher money for nothing? I don't think so. But the authority on that I will leave is you all. You tell me whether that's true. What they said was, I said that they were paying, I think, 143 million a year for nothing. Their rebuttal was, well, first of all, we're not paying money for nothing as much anymore. We're cutting these fees down. And in the last year, we only paid 59 million. Well, what they're not telling you is, what about the last 10 years? You already told us that you're paying less now for nothing than you used to pay for nothing, but you're only telling us what you paid in the last year. So I don't know whether that 59 million is right or not, because I don't have access to their records. But I'm quite confident from what they've said, it was a bigger number before, probably closer to the 150 million or whatever. But regardless, that 59 million, I believe, would pay a 1% COLA. Is that right? So just that alone would pay, or close to whatever, 1% of your COLA. But in any case, it's always fun to hear somebody defend paying money for nothing. Well, it's only 59 million. Come on, it's nothing. So I think the next one may be the last one. Let's see. Now this one is, again, particularly disturbing. STRS said they comply with fiduciary standards under state law, which mirror ERISA fiduciary standards. Then I had a law firm put together a memo on this, which says the pension plan participant protections provided by ERISA are simply not available to STRS participants, whether retired or still teaching. ERISA, the Employee Retirement Investment Security Act, Income Security Act, 1974. It's been around since 1974. There have massive regulations, massive investigations, all types of prohibited transactions, none of which exist under Ohio state pension law. Interpretations, and there's massive body of law precedent for anybody to claim that STRS complying with state fiduciary standards is comparable to ERISA is just plain fraudulent as far as I'm concerned. It's just dead wrong. And what's disturbing is, again, they are telling you this is the state of the law. That is not the state of law. There's not an ERISA attorney in this country who would agree that state pension law is as comprehensive as federal pension law. In fact, federal pension law says in its preamble, it has been created to establish comprehensive law where none exists. So and this is something I mentioned in Who Stole My Pension, the book, is that their state regulation of public pensions is like a patchwork quilt. There's a little regulation here, a little regulation there, but most of the important issues are not addressed under state law. For example, can a pension fund invest in derivatives, or can a pension fund invest in Bitcoin? Can a pension fund invest in a fund of funds? These specific financial innovations are not addressed under state law, and they never will be, because Wall Street's evolving and state law moves incrementally. So it's Wall Street moves at the speed of lightning, state law moves at the speed of the turtle. So anyhow, so I think those are, I think that's the look. Is there one more? Is that it?
Yep.
Yeah, it's it. So basically, I just wanted to point out in a way that you will remember that what STRS is telling you is wrong, okay? As frightening as it is to believe that the people who are running your pension fund are not the final word on what is the state of the law, or what is the state of, fundamental investment truths, like, is a carried interest a fee? Of course it's a fee. Everybody knows. In fact, I worked on the first performance fees allowed in 1983 when I was at the SEC, and it was called a performance fee. Back then, carried interest was called a performance fee. Now they've changed it to carried interest. But since the regulators first approved performance fees, they were always called fees. So that's the major points I wanted to have stick in your mind as we walk away from this after this meeting. But now I'd like to turn it over to any questions that anybody has.
Yeah, great presentation, Ted, first of all. I noticed at the last update, SRS sent out updates, a monthly update, and they were rather proud to say that they made 29.28% in their gross returns. Next paragraph, in full disclosure, they said we made 29.16 as our net returns. So I always thought gross minus net gave you your investment cost, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, when I did the math, it was 0.12, which is 12 basis points. I remember reading articles with CEM, which is our benchmarking service, and they would state that the average defined benefit plan has investment cost of approximately 55 basis points, 0.5% or higher. And I remember in their rebuttal to benchmark services that when you were pointing out that they were hiding fees, one of their arguments was exactly what you said, is that carried interest is not a cost. And when they actually came in at 36.9 basis points a couple years ago, and then CEM adjusted them upwards to be more in the average of 40 basis points. So they got adjusted upwards. So there are people that they pay their monies to. This is a question, not a speech eventually. It sounded like a speech. So their own service that they pay money to moved up their cost to 40. But their argument, one of their STRS arguments in rebuttal to you is that we didn't include carried interest, it's not really an investment cost. So this year, when they claimed they had 29.28 gross, 29.16 net, they said this includes all fees, costs, and carried interest. And it added up to 12 basis points. So if you were a board trustee member and they're throwing this at you, I mean, I know how I would be feeling as a board trustee member, but how is that even possible? That's the first question. And the second question, generally when you have investment costs of, your fees and your cost and carried interest, what percent of your cost is generally carried interest? I was always under the impression that carried interest was almost half of your investment costs when you look at fees and costs. So if they're including it this year, how do they go from 40, which they were forced to do it from CEM, all the way down to 12 when they're under the microscope? How do they think that nobody's going to catch that, and what will the response be?
Well, this I think is a perfect question for Chris, because Chris is a CFA and spent a lot of time on it. I'll chime in too,
But I don't even know how to begin with this. I don't believe any of the numbers there. So you gotta remember, this last fiscal year was one of the greatest years in the stock market ever. Remember, fiscal years end June 30th. So the last, and our pensions are in fiscal year. The S&P 500 was up around 40%. I said something, the leverage, because this private equity is like a leveraged S&P fund, a leveraged S&P fund was up 72% for the fiscal year. So they may legitimately try to come up with returns that big. But remember, when returns are that big, that's when the carried interest is so much bigger in the big return years. So we're gonna have incredible, so the return in this year could be 90% carried interest, and the year before it could be 5 or 10. Here are the list of managers at TRS here. There are over 200 managers here, all with different fee formulas that nobody understands anywhere. Even CEM doesn't even understand the detail level. I could tell you for this year, of these 200 here, they could range from 400 basis points to 600 basis points in fees, or maybe even higher with this report. We could be up to 10%, 1,000% interest on some of these, but I don't know which ones are or which ones aren't.
Yeah.
This is a culture of corruption, and you know, when the famous one, you know, you can't tell, if we tell you the secrets here, you can't invest in the hot investment. That's what Bernie Madoff told all his investors. If you have to ask questions,
I was an expert in the Madoff trial, by the way. Yeah.
You don't get in. And so that's part of that. But I just want to name some of these firms and just tell you some stories, because around the same big ones. You got your unique ones like Panda, but the big four are all over the place. You've got Apollo Management. Apollo's CEO gave $150 million to Jeffrey Epstein for advice.
And he said, don't take the girls with you.
Advice and a massage.
Apollo earlier had gotten involved with CalPERS in the trustee and the CEO, and I think the CEO ended up committing suicide. So Jeffrey Epstein wasn't the first suicide associated with Apollo. And of course, you all have a couple of
As a
Apollo
board
funds.
member of CalPERS committed
Suicide.
Alberto
Then the CEO, went to prison.
Yeah, but
And
the
both-
board member committed suicide.
But Apollo got away with everything. They didn't have to pay a fine, and they still got away with all that. And this whole, you know, the Epstein. So Apollo is, you all got a couple of Apollo funds. Bain Capital is where Mitt Romney made his money. You've got that. GTCR, that's the former governor of Illinois, Bruce Rauner's fund. You all got that one. Kohlberg Kravis, that's one I've been involved in litigation in Kentucky, KKR. There's something called Violation Tracker, the unions put together. And so you can go on Violation Tracker. I was telling John about this, and John and I worked on articles over the years, that it'll tell you how many laws each one of these firms have violated. In KKR, it was only like 38 or something. So they've been fined by the SEC. So all these firms have been fined for the SEC for taking excessive fees, but that has never been mentioned in a board meeting anywhere that I know of. You don't see any of that. So this whole culture of corruption. Then I've got a couple here. Carlyle Group is another one that's been involved in New York, and of course, our Federal Reserve guys from there. The new guy, the Republican running for Virginia governor, is the former CEO of Carlyle. So you've got all the political ties here are just all over. W.L. Ross, that's Wilbur Ross, who was Trump's Commerce Secretary. Some of y'all may remember that name. You got the W.L. Ross Fund. So in Blackstone, which I think is the worst of the worst, Steve Schwartzman was one of Trump's top aides. He threw a $5 million birthday party for himself with Rod Stewart and all this stuff using our public pension money. And he accused, he compared Obama to Hitler because he was going to take away his carried interest tax deduction. That was the head of Blackstone, Mr. Schwartzman. So we're dealing with a bunch of rogue characters here.
But I think the bottom line is here that nobody can explain the numbers.
Well, that was.
And I had, John wrote an article about this. He said that they announced that the private equity was up 65%. And I said, well, John, asked them, so what are the fees? And what was the answer to this?
No answer.
No answer.
Bottom line, they wouldn't answer, how much money a 65% private equity gain had added to the STRS bottom line. They wouldn't answer how much had been paid in carried interest. However, they reiterated multiple times that the 65% was after carried interest had been paid. So, you know, essentially.
So they're confident that the investments are up 65%.
Well, they wouldn't, I also asked them what had powered that performance, to give me an overview of the investments that caused that very nice gain. They wouldn't put that out. My guess is that there's a lot of leverage on it, and they don't want to show leverage, because leverage is, very, very dangerous on the downside. And this is a pension that, if there was a down year, would be in an existential crisis.
But I think one of the things is these are almost like barbells in the investment strategy. There'll be a lot of really low cost, there'll be a lot of low cost index funds, and then there's the 30%, which is in billions, of all these high fee funds. So there'll be a group of funds that's under 10 basis points and a group that are over 300 basis points. So you've got the barbells, so they'll try to always point and try to make the bigger averages by emphasizing the smaller fee funds, and they'll do full disclosure on those and act like they're transparent. Oh, we're transparent on 70% of our assets. So, you know, it's like saying we're transparent on all the accounts that we don't steal from. You know, the other 30% that we steal from, you know, there's no transparency. So that's kind of the game that's being played there. So you have to really look a little deeper in the numbers when you start getting into that. You know.
So
Here's a question that I have, and because I go to meetings like this, it might be the Hancock County retired teachers, and I get up and I give my little dog and pony show. I have a handful of slides, and I say, you know, here's the deal. What SDRS tells us, we question. I'm not saying that we're right, they're wrong, without any real deep investigation. Let's get to the bottom. In order to do that, you, and I usually point to whoever the SDRS person is, have to give us the records. I don't know why you say that, Robin. You have every record you could ever ask for. And I said, no, we want to know how much was invested in each and every alternative investment. What are all the deposits? How much has come out of that went to the money managers? And how much is it worth today? Well, you can't know that. And then I say, okay, so then we don't have all the information. You have all the information we're required to give you. Well, that's why we're going to court, apparently. So we'll find out if you're right. My question is, and invariably, Bill moves the bishop and it's checkmate. Because he says, we had $100 million bottom line to the STRS fund at the end of any year. Your pension is $100 million richer as a result of our efforts. And that is indisputable, undeniable, etc. I really don't, if he were there, or probably you were there, or even John could probably smack that one out of the park. I'm like, you know, it's what I told him. I said, you're getting information from me. I'm Ray Washburn. You got Mickey Mantle on the bench. He could pinch hit and answer this question perfectly for you. But you, HBA, didn't want to hear from him at first. And I said, you're having me present. Why not get the guy who wrote it? here, I pushed the button and he's on the speaker with us. You know, no, you're doing fine, Robin. So, it's 100 million that they say they add, and I don't really know how to say, I don't believe you, other than
And
say, well.
one of the things you never want to do in a secrecy environment is, what they want you to do is to come up, I'm gonna keep all the information secret, now guess what's in my hand? And then when you guess, they say, no, you're wrong. So you never want to, and in my report, which was termed a preliminary report, because it didn't give me the information I needed, and I don't play that game. I'm not going to guess what's in their hand, and I don't go down too many investment rabbit holes, like is the number 8 or 7%. I try to focus on the things that people will remember and that are indisputable, like conflicts of interest, these blatantly incorrect statements that are fundamental, like ERISA, transparency requirements. This is all pretty fundamental. If they're lying about that, then you shouldn't trust them about anything. But that's one of the big problems with secrecy is never fall into the trap of volunteering what you think is in their hand, because that's exactly what they want you to do. Because then they leap and say, you're wrong. So, go ahead.
I have two questions if I can. First, considering everything that's been said so far, what are our future action plans? Where do we go from here, knowing that everything's been shared already?
Well, the future action plan we were developing already, which is one, we were working with a group to do a Kickstarter campaign of OPERS. And the reason we wanted to do that, well, first of all, they came to me, they wanted to do it. But the second thing is, an investigation with OPERS will, by the way, here's Andy Engel, who snuck into the room. This is the lawyer who's actually doing a lot of the, writing the letters on behalf of Chris and on your behalf to STRS. So Andy is in the Rhode Island papers yesterday, I believe, for his work there.
I'm notorious on the East Coast now, too.
Yeah. And so, and it's remarkable because I did 3 investigations in Rhode Island starting in 2013. And 13, 15, and 16. Every investigation, they refused to give me the records. And then I had nothing to do. So I didn't have a legal team that was willing to sue. We now have that here. And Ohio is the first case I've worked on where when they say, no, we're not going to give you the records, I was able to say, fine, we're going to sue you. So this is changing. So we've done now, the first forensic investigation of a public pension fund was in 2013 in Rhode Island. And now we've had about 8 or 10, I don't know. And now it's a new era where these guys are willing to sue to get records, to push the issue. They've said, up till now, they said, no, those are trade secrets, exempt from public records law. There's no trade secrets here. I, as a wealthy individual, can invest in any of these deals. That they will send me the prospectuses without any confidentially secret signing or anything. So there's nothing I've seen, and as a lawyer, written hundreds of these documents. There's no trade secrets at all. So what the first thing would happen if we did an OPERS investigation would be, we'd start with, we already know that the Ohio Retirement Study Council didn't do a fiduciary audit, an independent fiduciary audit in a timely fashion. Again, reiterating the point in your case. In your case, they didn't do it at all. In that case, they did an audit, but they didn't use an independent firm to do the work. So we would, if we investigate there, we will double back on your case and say to the legislature, once again, we've demonstrated you failed, and now we're talking 200+ billion instead of 100 billion. The other thing is, in my most recent Forbes article, really pressing the SEC to get involved here. And that's something you all and other teachers groups and public groups and unions, AFSCME, and the other groups around the country should be pushing for greater SEC involvement. So these are some of the things, but the other thing is that you all need to continue. I'm supposed to meet with one of your legislators this afternoon Oh, by the way, I'm also supposed to do NPR at 1:30, television and radio. And then Diane Rendell has wanted, last I heard, wanted to meet this afternoon. But, you know, you've got to keep pressing on these issues. The money's gonna be taken out of your account for the rest of your life. So you can't let it go. And this is not changing. So it's up to you all to keep at it. I'm keeping at it. My wife says, why do you even work anymore? I said, well, because people ask me to do this work and no one else can do it. But anyhow, you've got to keep pushing. I've got to keep pushing. We've got to push the SEC. We've got to push attorney generals. You know, anyone who will listen.
Yeah, I've pushed a lot of
Yeah,
other,
Ted.
okay, go ahead.
Yeah.
I end my column today pointing out that the chairman of the Senate Banking Committee is Sherrod Brown. And that one thing everybody should be doing is contacting Sherrod Brown and saying you support the SEC rule change proposed by the newly named SEC Chairman Gary Gensler, who says they want full disclosure of carried interest and fees in private equity, specifically to protect public pensions.
And there's
And
also
Sherrod Brown can get that done, and Sherrod Brown works for all these people in this room.
also Barbara Roper, who used to be head of the Consumer Federation of America. She is now what, the investor advocate in SEC? I've worked with Barbara in the past. She's a very like-minded person, and the fact that she is now at SEC headquarters is important. I would encourage you all to reach out to her in her capacity as an investor advocate. But you know, there's a lot of work to be done here, and that's a great question.
Well, I want to point out in Kentucky, we've done, I've put some legislation together for transparency of contracts and different things. And what has happened is that I got the legislation passed, and then the retirement systems still refuse to even obey the laws. And then I tried to get the auditor, the attorney general would refuse to enforce the law. I go to the auditor and try to get them to enforce the law. So it's an ever-ending process that you've got to keep on top. And one of the things that's really unique, one of the reasons I want to come here, is this is one of the best groups, probably this is the best group in the country doing grassroots pension work right now in the entire
Let me
United
tell
States.
you 4 reasons why. First of all, you've got an former attorney general willing to sue. Never happened before in any case I've worked on. Second of all, unbelievably, you know, I do forensic investigations, and my clients, like you all, often say to me, but Ted, Stearns doesn't agree with your findings. Like, of course they don't agree with my findings. But there's this belief, magical thinking, that if you confront the perpetrator with the truth, they'll say, oh my God, you're right. I'm gonna change. I'm gonna become a new person. Never happens. So people often say, well, I'm surprised that they disagree. In your case, you've got 2 board members who agreed with my finding. Never happened before. We've also got in Pennsylvania a board member who's demanding transparency counsel and is calling and working with the FBI. The pension fund is, I think, set aside $40 million to fight the FBI.
So their own pensioners' money using to cover up their own corruption.
One could say
keep
to
the FBI.
obstruct justice,
Yeah.
okay? $40 million.
That's a Pennsylvania staff. So how
If
much
I
is-
said I'll do a forensic investigation for $75,000, what do you think they'd say to me? Get the hell out of here, right? You know? But, so those are 2 things. There were a couple of others, but anyhow, this is a remarkable situation. And then another big thing is your Facebook group and Orda's advocacy. These are key differences that have not been present in any forensic investigation I've been involved with. And I've done them.
Which one of you guys could comment on the whole Funston issue? Because I've sent letter to Carfanaga. I've sent it to every single member of the ORSC. Boom, 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 boom. And got response back from their executive director, and they're aware of your concerns, blah, blah, blah.
Now, you would think that this retirement study council,
But this is important. I think this is
Yeah.
as,
Yeah, no,
as
okay.
bad as being ripped off is then getting it covered over.
I mean, you would think that this retirement study council, $100 billion pension fund, statutorily mandated fiduciary review just wasn't done. What was the excuse? Did they forget? No, they didn't forget, because Dan Schroeder kept reminding them that they were supposed to do it. And then everybody says, well, okay, we didn't forget, but we just didn't do it, you know? That should be front page news. That's $100 billion, and plus the other funds, you're now talking a couple $100 billion. That's probably state pension funds in Ohio are probably the leading driver of state financial health. More money is involved one way or another in the pension fund system here than probably anything else in the entire economy. But it's remarkable to me that even that, I equate that to like finding, you know, the dead body with the picture of the guy with the gun standing right on the bullet in mid-motion. It's like, if the failure to do a statutorily mandated audit is a yawn, then what is it gonna take?
Well,
but
there's a reason for that.
Sure.
Those hedge funds, in which the investments are being made, own most of the newspapers in the state of Ohio at this point.
Right.
And most of the television stations as well. Or if they don't own them, their owners are beholden to them. And so the reason they're not looking at this stuff in the way that they would have 15 years ago when I was in government in AG's office is because their corporate masters will not let them do it. And so they're complicit, which is why, once again, you come back to this grassroots, you know, just a bunch of old teachers on Facebook. No offense, effort.
And that's one of the key things that I didn't, you know, I said there were 4 things, I only remembered 2.5, but one of them was clearly a key determinant here of the success we've had has been the strength of the Facebook group and the strength of ORDA.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
but it's amazing.
And that doesn't happen in any other state, it's not as strong. But
So I just wanna say, I'm sorry, you got a second question, go ahead and ask it.
And second question, like, in lieu of all this stuff, if the evidence surfaces of massive corruption, is it possible to sue for damages and loss over the previous years?
Yes.
Been without a court for a long time.
Well, what's going on in
let me-
Kentucky right
yeah,
now is
yeah.
there's a massive lawsuit where all the money managers are being sued.
And I'm an expert in those cases, so. But I wanna go back to his specifics on Funston. I am conflicted in this Funston, because sometimes I've worked with Ted, I also work with another group, a woman minority owned consulting firm out of New Orleans called the Hackett Group. And we actually bid on the Ohio Study Council, projects. But I think probably once they saw my name as part of the bidding, I think that pretty much sunk the bid, even though it was a few $100,000 less than Funston. Funston is known for producing reports that say nothing except great things about management. One of the things I worked with in Pennsylvania is that Funston beat our group out there as well, is that there's a great reporter, Joe DiStefano of the Philadelphia Inquirer, who got in and did open records and found that in the Funston contract, that they required that the board wasn't allowed to see any of the findings until staff had already okayed and rubber stamped it to them. So it's a completely, the Funston is known for completely doing corrupt audits, in my opinion, and they've won both of these in the Ohio Study Council because of that, because we know they will find nothing in the report. I mean, that's basically.
But they're connected to STRS handlers somehow.
Well,
Somebody help us. They either own CEM or CEM owns them.
There's a lot of multiple connections. Funston is kind of a lot of these consulting groups, the one I work with, is we're all kind of just like, we're all like gig workers, we all kind of come together. But one of Funston's people on their staff is the former executive director of the Ohio School Employees group that is actually, was on the, ORS board. So there's multiple connections. The CEM founder's on Funston's payroll too. So it's just, there's multiple, it's just known in the industry among management that if you want a rubber stamp audit and you want to determine what's in it, you just got, Funston will do it for you. You have to pay them a lot of money, $400,000 or $500,000, but they'll produce what you want them to.
780. for us.
780, yeah.
But the
780,000.
interesting thing about the failure to do the fiduciary audit was that it's not hard to find an auditor who'll give you a favorable opinion. So why didn't they do it? I mean, it's in your face to violate the law, just not do it at all. What they should have done, 16 years ago or 6 years ago, is hired somebody to give them a favorable
Well, I think 4 or
opinion.
5 years ago, for one of the plans, they hired Funston, was a person. One of the other ones that hired Funston 3 or 4 years ago, and they did a whitewash for them. And then I think, there was another one, John, the Aon Hewitt did kind of a whitewash for somebody a little bit.
Yeah,
before.
Aon Hewitt did, the OPERS fiduciary audit, and Aon Hewitt, was the alternative investment advisor to the board at OPERS, and the Aon Hewitt fiduciary audit found 112 basis points above peer group average in hedge funds, 76 basis points above peer group average in private equity. And then if you did the math with the CAFR, they didn't help you on this, but it amounts to $223.4 million a year in just those two categories in excessive fees over and above what everybody else pays. And because Aon Hewitt had that conflict of interest, they couldn't talk to the advisors to get an explanation on why Ohio was paying these excessive fees. So one of their findings was that there should be a study to find out. You know, should hire somebody else to find out why. And of course, Retirement Study Council ignored that, and we still are overpaying something that, with their actuarial anticipated return, amounts to $1.95 billion annually at the end of the 30-year period that has disappeared because of these excessive fees.
But on Ohio school employees, that was just a couple of years ago, and they hired Funston to do the study council, do the review of Ohio school employees, and then Funston immediately after hired the executive director of the school employees to work for them. So that's the kind of, the conflict there with Funston that we've got a history there of recently, not this one, but of some of the other plans. So the study council knows what they're getting, and they're going to get what they.
John, I think you had a question.
Kathy and John and I have been on this for 19 years. This is a bright day for us. I kind of felt like we were playing the Whammo game with our kids, just pop here one and it pops up in another spot.
Right.
My question to you is this. STRS bought the building for rent in Dallas, Texas, the highest cost per square foot in the history of Texas. They purchased a portion of Hudson Yards. The company that sold it got everything back for what they had invested. Maine and STRS bought a refinery in the Caribbean, which is used as a case study at Ohio State University for the chemical engineers studying refineries. They invested $450 million and it ran for 5 months, and it's now closed permanently with the clause that it can't be reopened because it's too bad. Yet STRS denies that these are just minor little pimples on their butt and we should ignore them. What can we do? And I'm sure there are hundreds of these cases. We know of 3.
Yeah. Well, what you can do is what we're doing, is we're suing for the records on all the investments. Real estate, I did an investigation in Rhode Island a few years ago of the real estate portfolio. And I found that the real estate portfolio there had made the state pension, I think, 23 basis points a year, and paid the hedge fund guys 4% a year. So it was a terrible deal. And I pointed out if they had simply put the money in T-bills or a money market account, they would have made 1 or 2%. Instead, they made 1/4% or something like that. So real estate is really tricky, but the key to all of this is ending secrecy and going after the documents. The underlying documents. Andy asked me this question just yesterday. He said, "Do you want, the performance figures and the fees, or alone, or do you want the underlying documents?" The underlying documents are critical. The underlying documents will say things that will make your hair drop out. There's crazy illegalities and stuff disclosed in the underlying documents. So the key to getting to all this is breaking that transparency, and Mark and Andy are working hard on that.
Let me just, give you an example of how easy it is. They refuse to give up, CEM is their benchmarking consultant. CEM refused to provide Ted with their, the funds with which STRS was compared in their benchmarking. Now, Ted's laughing through this whole thing because he had already gotten it in Rhode Island exactly the way we asked for it.
Yeah.
But we sued in the Ohio Supreme Court, and amazingly, we show up at a mediation, they said, "Oh yeah, we're gonna give you that."
Yeah.
But we had to sue them, and then they wouldn't agree to pay our fees, and modest fees in bringing the case, and which is why the case is still in front of the Ohio Supreme Court. So we have to take a firm stand on these things, but by suing, at the end of the day, when they are at risk of being compelled, they're gonna step up here, and I think the more we do that, the more it's like training an animal.
And this group this litigation in Kentucky, they're suing what? Hundreds of money or dozens of money?
Well, there's a couple different suits. So
Well, I don't want to go too much into it, but
one's Blackstone, KKR, the big guys, and then another one's got to do with all alternatives.
so they're actually trying to get a lot of these documents there
Just to
too.
follow up on my question.
Yeah.
We have 5 different offices around the United States handling real estate for STRS.
Right.
One's in Columbus, the other 4 are Iran. Do other states or other retirement systems have these multiple branch offices on real estate?
I don't know.
There are a few. Many of them will have 1 or 2. I would say less than a quarter of them have these outside offices, and even then, and then there'll be a few. So it's not totally off the board, but they're usually not as many, and fewer. So it's just another it's just another waste of money.
Another encouraging thing that I mentioned in this Forbes article I just wrote is pension trust. You've got at your pension remarkably 2 board members, Rudy Fitzenbaum and Wade Steen, who agree with my findings and who come forward with additional analysis of their own, which not only supports what I've said, but further develops on what they've said. But I've been contacted by trustees at other pension funds across the country who have actually, in some cases, I've set up meetings with the SEC where they've met repeatedly with the SEC. They're disappointed the SEC hasn't done more. But these are board members who have asked me to get them in to meet with the SEC. So that's very encouraging. Again, 20 years ago, that was never happening. 10 years ago, it's really only been the last 2 or 3 years.
10 years ago, I was the trustee, and I called Ted, and my retirement system would not even let me as a trustee see contracts.
They don't. They don't hear it. SDRS,
Yeah, right.
when Wade
Yeah.
Steen went to the,
Yeah.
had an investment meeting, and he brought Rudy with him, the staff said, well, we were gonna share some confidential information with you, but you have Rudy here, so we can't share. Now, this is in August. Rudy's
Rudy's
a
now
board
on
member
board, yeah.
in September.
Yeah.
So what's so confidential that you can't tell him 3 weeks before he becomes a board member?
Well, that's what's
Right?
going on in Pennsylvania. They
Right.
refuse to give the board member this information, and they've told her that.
But even when they do, they give you these redacted documents. And so one of the things, I had real fun with an article that me and John did a while back, which is one of the most fun things I've done. We took the Ohio Per documents, and I knew of some ones that we had the full documents unredacted. And actually from a Kentucky trove and a Pennsylvania trove on a website called Naked Capitalism, and I got some of them through mine and Ted's investigation in Kentucky, and we made sure and we compared those to the redacted versions that Oprah's gave us, And so what did they actually redact? The things they always redact is like, where are the assets held? Cayman Islands, always redact Cayman Islands. Then the things about excessive fees, they redact them. There's nothing about investment strategies or anything they're redacting. It all has to do with fees, expenses, where they're, where offshore they're domiciled, all the things they don't want anybody to see. And then other areas where they are saying that they don't take fiduciary duty. And I mean, that's one of the things Ted's always pointed out, that that's where they're always redacting. So we're fighting the redaction battle in Kentucky now that we've got some disclosed. They're on the website, but they've still redacted them completely. So those are just the ongoing type
You know how
of
they
things.
justify it? When you look at their investment analysis, they always include headline risk as one of the issues that confront them. And that's essentially, if any of this stuff comes out, that's a headline risk.
Yeah, we're corrupt.
To
Yeah.
them. Exactly.
Yeah, I did an investigation in Shelby County, Tennessee in 2006, and I pointed out that they didn't know where their money was invested, and their consultant told them that was a good thing, because that eliminated headline risk. They said, if you invest with Madoff, you don't know it, so if anybody calls you and says, did you lose money? Yeah. So that's, the headline risk argument is that, we keep the secret so that you don't get embarrassed, and of course, it makes no sense at all, but that's a frequent argument they use.
Yeah, there's a lot of fun. What happens a lot, I was a consultant on 2 different plans that we ended up having Madoff and didn't know we had Madoff. Because they had these structures called fund of funds. So a hedge fund of funds, it would have, actually, Madoff was buried inside of a fund called Tremont, which is buried inside of a fund of funds hooked up. So you got these layers and layers of fund of funds. I don't think we have as many in here in Ohio as we do in Chicago, some other ones I've seen. But these fund of funds, and you've had them in the past, you may have 100 other funds. So in the Kentucky, we're talking about this, we have 2 major kind of fund of funds, but there may be 300 underlying funds. We don't even know the names of them.
Yeah, in Shelby County, they had 5 hedge fund of funds that each had 50 underlying managers. And I said, well, how do you know there's not duplication across the board? They said it can't be. So I went through, there was huge duplication. Made no sense at all. You had a question.
I just had a question.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit more about the conflicts of interest that you see, because I know we talked about Funson, but you talked about Callan and Cliffwater. Let's talk about that a little bit more, because
yeah, well, the Callan thing was particularly interesting because we pointed out in the report that the contract. By the way, Callan gave us their contract. They said, no problem, here it is. Cliffwater said it was a trade secret. You couldn't see it, remember?
Yeah.
And I said, but we already have it. He said, well, so then they ultimately gave us the Cliffwater contract too. But anyhow, Callan gave us a contract, and the contract said very clearly that they have to disclose any money, Callan has to disclose any money it receives from any of the pension fund's money managers. So we asked the pension fund, show us those disclosures. And if there weren't any, they'd never disclosed those numbers. So that's a very clear, the contract said they're a fiduciary to the pension fund, that they're not allowed to receive any compensation from money managers unless it's disclosed, and they admitted they've never been disclosed. So that was case closed. I mean, you would think that someone would be very disturbed, but like the board members, but apparently not. But that's an example of a conflict of interest. My investigations are what I call high impact investigations. You're not paying me $750,000 to review everything, because A, I don't have everything, and B, what I do is I focus on things that are just glaringly bad and indisputable. So by focusing on these things, we can have high impact without looking at everything. We can just look at select things. And this was one of the most significant
let
findings.
me add
in
to
my
that
opinion.
too. The other conflict that you won't know about is that all the OEA board members go to Callan College.
Yeah.
So they're indoctrinated before they even get on the board. Secondly, that professional training that they give to SDRS staff is obviously that's a conflict. So when Callan consultant stands up there in March and says, well, Rita Walters is running for the board and we think a stable board is great, we think, Rita should stay on the board. How does a consultant get away in a board meeting talking about who should be on the board when they're elected? I mean, that's ridiculous, right?
Well, I would say that one of the first things that they should address at their next educational summit is what about their contract? I mean, you want to talk about fiduciary
Right.
education, you should say to the board members, look, this has been brought up, that the contract says this, we didn't do it, so what does this mean? Is this a good thing or a bad thing? So a lot of what goes on at these so-called educational
Right.
things are, questionable. Many of them, the money managers pay to go to these conferences and educational forums to meet the trustees. That's what they pay. That's who's underwriting the cost of the conference.
Well, I want to talk about biggest conflict dollar-wise I see right now, it's current enough, because we had this big year in performance numbers of over 50%, is that everyone's conflicted to inflate the performance numbers. So the private equity, remember, they get their bonuses based on their performance numbers, inflate. The staff, which is you've got the biggest staff conflict in the United States here, because their salary is dependent on their going along with the inflation of performance numbers with the private equity hedge fund firms. And so that could be in the hundreds of millions, this going on right now. To me, that's the biggest conflict that's going on this second, is that huge conflict that's going on now. And maybe a lot of them just want to know that they're in this coming, they just want to get this big payday, because this is a big payday for this year.
Right.
For a lot of people.
And by the way, I didn't address, I don't think at all, the
Yeah.
staff conflict issues in my report, because it was just too
Yeah.
much information. It was off my immediate
But it's
radar.
something, yeah.
But it is a very real issue, and the more I understand about it and hear about it, it's very disturbing, because as Chris says, the staff has a motivation to hire firms that can self-value assets, inflate performance, because they get their compensation, they're in it together.
Right.
That's a very real problem, it's one I didn't address.
Well, that's the door opener to the FBI.
Could be.
Because you literally, there's an investigation at the auditor's office right now based on information supplied by a board of trustees member indicating $7.8 million in bonuses were improperly paid based on false information that shaved costs that would have been to the benefit of the fund managers and the staff. So, essentially, if you get the law enforcement in there on that issue, which is impossible to ignore, they don't just look at one issue. Once they're in, it's gonna be like Pennsylvania, they're gonna look at everything, and you'll have access to documents at the end of a criminal investigation, but also means to litigate against the fund managers that have been looting the fund. You can't sue SDRS because of sovereign immunity, but the other side of that transaction can be sued.
Oh, also, I should mention, when you do this type of work, you say, what's the next step, what's gonna happen? You never know. It's like casting your fate to the wind. You throw something out there, and then somebody, a prosecutor, an FBI guy somewhere, a year from now, 6 months from now, I got a call from the Inspector General of the state saying, can you do forensic investigation for our Inspector General's office? And he said, no doubt you've done this many times before. I said, no, I've never gotten a call from the State Inspector General. So you do this work, and who knows where it leads, but I can tell you one thing, that if you don't do the work, nothing's gonna happen. I left the SEC in 1986. Since 1986, I reported hundreds of cases of securities violations to the SEC. There was no whistleblower program until 2010. In 2018, the SEC gave me $78 million for blowing the whistle. So that was like 35 years getting nowhere. and then all of a sudden getting somewhere. And, you know.
Give me a little bit of that.
The
Yeah,
law-
unfortunately, it wasn't my case. I'm still waiting on my money for my turn. I'm still.
But it was a case where the law had to catch up with me, because the law there was no mechanism for the SEC to pay whistleblowers for busting crimes. Eventually it did. With this stuff, you know, you have, I think, the most compelling situation in the country, particularly if this Opers group follows suit and does a forensic investigation. But between having board members, former attorney generals, powerful Facebook groups, an organization, and a massive amount of money here, you got these 5 pension funds. And the other thing that's unique, I've never seen a legislative oversight group like we have here at Ohio, Retirement Study Council. And the fact that it has just completely failed to do its job, not even done it badly, just failed to do it. That's another distinguishing factor.
Yeah, there are a few others out there. I think the salaries here are a distinguishing factor.
Yeah,
To
salary,
me,
the staff.
staff salaries here are way, way above. I mean, we have this public oversight in Kentucky. It's pretty much a joke, you know, that there'll be a joint committee, but there's not a separate staff stuff. Ohio is unique in.
Well, you have legislators here, and you have a statute that says these certain audits have to be done.
There's nothing to that. Yeah, there's some smaller oversight.
So I think you have, you know, one of the things I want to impress you with, I think you have the front-running, most compelling case going right now.
I just want to add one thing.
Even more compelling than Pennsylvania, where the FBI is already involved.
What's, right now, ORSC is reviewing their policies. Now is the perfect time to call them on the carpet.
Yeah.
Because they have become, they're in bed with the funds now. They're not oversight. I went to Cafagna and asked them to introduce 2 bills that we had last GA, General Assembly. One was for broadcasting the board meetings, and one was transparency on private equity. I can't do those bills because I might do something for Opers and I might do something for another fund. I said, what? And he wasn't chair yet. So, I mean, now we gotta really push on them to do their oversight and make sure that those policies are followed through, so they don't let another 5, 6 years go in between these things. I just wanted to say, that's something that we need to focus on right now.
I want to, go ahead, Dean.
Yeah, the other thing, when we were talking about transparency earlier, do you realize that they have, once a year, they go over board policy? I don't know if anybody listened. You know, I mean, this meeting went on until 5:30 at night, you know, from 8 o'clock. The last hour and a half of it, they couldn't get past the first couple pages as Wade Steen was trying to get the word transparency in board policy. The other board members wouldn't do that. There were some things bounced off me in board policy, and I had a couple suggestions. I looked at the board policy and I said, why in the hell are you letting the executive director say yes or no to your information request? And so I said, if he says no, you as a board member should take it back to your committee and said, the board member, the executive director refused our request. And then the committee could get together and vote on whether it was a legit decision by the executive director, or no, the committee really needed that, and that's an important request. And if they voted that it was really important, they needed that, then the executive director shall turn over the request to the trustees, whose job is to manage the board. You realize that a certain group, OEA, board members argued that the executive director was fine and they didn't want that responsibility?
Yeah. That happens in a lot of plans, and what happens is that, and I've been on the Kentucky board myself and been through this, that someone makes a decision, once the chair of the boards, because they almost become a dictator, and then they hand all the power over to the executive director, and then it all gets controlled, so that basically the rest of the board really only has one decision, and that's the elected chair. And then once they elect the chair, they're pretty much kept out of all the details. And most of them don't want to be part of the details. Most of them just want to rubber stamp and do what they're told and go.
That's what we see. I've been seeing for decades that board members usually only get the materials for the meeting a few days before the meeting. So they can't possibly, and they've been complaining about this since before 2000. Board members would complain to me. So that's all part of the game, is that if you don't get the big package till the night before the meeting, there's no way you're gonna.
So my question for both of you is, I mean, I have conversation with legislators that meet with ORC. It seems like they're just over their heads when it comes to pension systems.
Well, they are.
I mean, I've had things explained to me why they can't do something, and I'm just going, that is the stupidest answer I've ever heard.
Well,
They don't wanna know.
Okay, so now you've got a group that takes a pride in sending their board members to, Callan College, and they won't entertain anybody else has gone up through their system, and they're a block that controls 5 of our 11 board members.
Right.
What is your suggestion on how to break this Callan College and have them, and give advice to a board member for just some basic training, because there are trustees managing $96 billion, and
Well,
they're competent.
the simplest way to deal with it is to really, which doesn't exist now, is to have a participant input, which is the board members should go to a college with the faculty picked by the participants. Okay, that's the only way. The only way you can really solve this is to have input from the participants. And that's what I was saying in my FCC article I just wrote, which is that what you're seeing around the country is participants, starting to come up with a roadmap, what the board members should be aware of, what regulators should be aware of, but there is no way of having that point-counterpoint unless the participants get to choose. And of course, that's not happening anywhere. But in my book, Who Stole My Pension, one chapter is called The People Managing Your Pension Don't Know What They're Doing. And that's because we have a system where these boards are made up of school teachers, cops, firefighters, but we have no investment experience whatsoever. And so
ORC is too.
ORC, there's nobody in your state legislature who knows anything about pensions.
Yeah, but
This is
even
not an
yeah.
easy business,
Yeah.
believe me. And when you talk about state pension law, you talk about investment strategies, you talk about ERISA, all of these things, we've been SEC pronouncements. There is nobody in your state legislature who knows this, and there's certainly no one at STRS who knows this.
But Ted and I disagree a little bit on this because, I was an investment expert, was the first investment expert on the board, they just ignored me. But we've had investment experts since then who have been in on it, who actually were hedge fund guys, so you get a lot of conflicts.
And of course, your 2 board members here are both investment.
They're not in the investment industry. I think your board members are better.
Yeah.
You've got an economist who, Rudy's got the economics background that's more, I think he's better than a person, an investment industry expert. And Wade and Steve's a CPA, they are an expert enough to know the things, but they're not conflicted in part of it. So what we saw in Kentucky when we put the law in for investment experts, after the failure of putting me on the board as investment expert just caused a lot of problems, they ended up creating all these kind of insider investment people who were all who had actually been part of hedge funds and different things like that. So there's all kinds of different things you have to continuously look and watch for.
Folks, I want to keep Ted on schedule. He's got meetings, and we need to wrap up our normal, and then we can sit and visit and chat